The story you were taught runs like a straight highway, primitive to modern, stumble to triumph, one clean climb. But Earth doesn't build highways, it flips tables. Ice cores show temperature cliffs, not gentle slopes. Sediment layers carry sudden ash, charcoal, and strange metals that don't belong. Whole animal kingdoms vanish in a blink. Human tool traditions appear, then snap out of existence as if someone cut the tape. If that pattern is real, then progress isn't a line, it's a restart after a wipeout. So here's the question that changes everything. In the last 100,000 years, how many times has Earth hit the reset button on life, climate, and human civilization? And how many of those restarts have we mistaken for the true beginning? Before we dive deeper, ignite that like button and prepare for the revelations to come. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from, what time it is there. And as always with our videos, the visuals are here to add context, but they aren't necessary to follow along. Thank you for always having our back. Prepare yourself, and let's dive in. The version of human history most people carry in their heads is smooth and reassuring, a slow climb from stone tools to satellites, from caves to skyscrapers, guided by intelligence and persistence. But the planet we evolved on has never been a stable stage politely waiting for civilization to mature. It has behaved more like a ruthless editor, repeatedly tearing pages out of the story and forcing survivors to start over with no memory of what came before. When geology, archaeology, and climate science are laid side by side, a far less comforting picture emerges, one defined not by steady progress, but by violent interruptions. Over the last 100,000 years, Earth has endured repeated cataclysms so abrupt and extreme that entire ecosystems collapsed within a human lifetime. Ice cores drilled from Greenland revealed temperature shifts measured not in millennia, but in single-digit years, sharp vertical lines in frozen time that look more like heart attacks than gradual change. Layers of sediment show sudden deposits of ash, charcoal, and pulverized rock, evidence of moments when forests burned continent-wide or skies darkened for years. These are not background fluctuations, they are planetary shocks. For humans living through them, the consequences were absolute. Population bottlenecks reduced millions to thousands, sometimes fewer. When numbers collapse that far, society cannot remain complex. Specialization vanishes first. There are no astronomers when survival requires constant movement, no architects when shelter must be temporary, no scribes when food scarcity makes long-term record-keeping impossible. Knowledge does not merely pause, it evaporates. Archaeological gaps reflect this reality. Entire cultures appear in the record with sophisticated tools, symbolic art, and regional organization, then vanish as if erased. Their disappearance is often treated as a mystery or attributed to migration, but the timing repeatedly coincides with abrupt environmental disasters. When climate flips violently, migration routes close, prey species disappear, and familiar landscapes become lethal. Survival favors those who abandon complexity, not those who cling to it. The planet itself leaves fingerprints of these resets. Megafauna, animals larger than 40 kilograms, dominated continents for tens of thousands of years and then disappeared almost simultaneously near the end of the last ice age. Mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, ancient horses, and camels vanished within a geological blink. These animals had survived countless earlier climate oscillations, which tells us the final blow was not ordinary change. It was speed. Adaptation cannot outrun catastrophe. Some mammoths were frozen so rapidly that undigested grass remained in their stomachs, plants that only grow in temperate conditions. Their bodies, preserved in Siberian permafrost, suggest death arrived not as a slow freeze, but as a sudden plunge, a shock strong enough to overwhelm animals evolutionarily designed for cold. To freeze 6 tons of muscle and fat before decomposition begins requires temperatures collapsing in hours or days, not centuries. Such events reshape more than biology. They shatter memory. Survivors, scattered and reduced to small groups, inherit a world stripped of context. Ruins become incomprehensible. Skills that once required collective effort vanish because no single person can preserve them alone. Over generations, what remains are distorted echoes, myths of lost ages, stories of gods who built great structures, legends of floods and fire from the sky. These myths are remarkably consistent across continents. Flood narratives appear in Mesopotamia, India, China, the Americas, and Australia. They describe a former world destroyed by water, a chosen few who survive, and a rebirth that follows catastrophe. Cultural diffusion cannot easily explain this global overlap among societies separated by oceans. Shared experience can. When melting ice sheets raised sea levels more than 100 meters, coastlines drowned, erasing settlements that had existed for thousands of years. To those living through it, the ocean did not rise gradually. It advanced relentlessly, swallowing fields, homes, and memory. Geological evidence confirms pulses of rapid sea level rise, moments when meltwater surged so fast it would have felt like an invasion rather than a trend. For coastal populations, which historically concentrate where food and trade are easiest, these were civilization-ending events. Cities built on fertile plains became seabeds. What survived was not architecture but story. This cyclical destruction explains another archaeological paradox: the sudden appearance of advanced knowledge. Sites like Göbekli Tepe display precise stonework and organized labor at a time when humans are assumed to have been simple foragers. Rather than representing spontaneous genius, such places may be the resurfacing of inherited knowledge, fragments preserved through oral tradition and ritual after a collapse. When conditions stabilized, humans rebuilt using what little survived. Stability is the key variable. During long periods of relatively calm climate, populations grow, settle, specialize, and accumulate knowledge. Agriculture emerges, trade networks form, architecture becomes monumental. But this progress rests on an assumption the planet does not honor. Stability is temporary. Astronomical mechanics alone guarantee disruption. Earth's orbit, tilt, and axial wobble shift in predictable cycles, altering how sunlight reaches the planet. These Milankovitch cycles drive ice ages and interglacial periods with clockwork precision. Roughly every 100,000 years, ice advances. In between, short, warm windows open. Civilization, as we know it, exists entirely within one such window. Add to this the randomness of volcanic supereruptions and cosmic impacts, and the picture becomes darker. A single volcano can dim the sun globally. A fragmented comet can ignite continent-scale fires. None of these care about borders, belief systems, or technological achievements. They reset everything. Seen through this lens, history stops looking linear. It becomes episodic. Rise, collapse, amnesia, recovery. Each cycle erases not only lives but accumulated understanding, ensuring that future societies mistake recovery for origin. We call ourselves modern because we remember little else. What remains unsettling is not that civilization can fall, but that it has likely fallen many times already. The archaeological silence between disasters is not proof of absence, it is evidence of erasure. When the planet resets, it does so thoroughly, grinding cities into sediment, scattering survivors, and forcing humanity back to its most basic state. Our world, dense with people and interdependent systems, is more fragile than any before it. Complexity amplifies vulnerability. If the past 100,000 years tell a consistent story, it is that Earth does not negotiate with civilization. It interrupts it, and every interruption rewrites the future. Around 12,900 years ago, the planet executed one of its most violent reversals, a climatic ambush so sudden it shattered the illusion that warming trends moved gently forward. The last ice age appeared to be ending, glaciers were retreating, ecosystems were recovering, and human populations were expanding into newly habitable regions. Then, without warning, the process snapped. Temperatures in the northern hemisphere plunged with such speed that entire regions were thrown back into glacial conditions within a few decades. This event, known as the Younger Dryas, was not a cooling period in the conventional sense. It was a planetary shock. Ice cores extracted from Greenland preserved this moment like a scar. In layers representing less than 3 years, temperatures dropped by as much as 15 degrees Celsius. To understand how extreme that is, imagine modern Europe losing the climate that sustains forests, agriculture, and cities in the time it takes a child to learn to read. Rivers froze, growing seasons vanished, and the ecological foundations humans relied upon collapsed almost overnight. For the people living through it, this was not climate change, it was environmental betrayal. Groups that had adapted to improving conditions suddenly found their food sources gone. Herds that once migrated predictably disappeared or died out. Plant species that supported foraging communities stopped growing. Survival demanded immediate retreat into smaller, more mobile groups. Social complexity became a liability. The biological record confirms the devastation. In North America alone, approximately 35 species of large mammals vanished during this interval. Mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths, ancient horses and camels all disappeared within a narrow window of time. These animals had endured repeated cold phases over hundreds of thousands of years. What they could not survive was the speed and intensity of the Younger Dryas transition. Human cultures collapsed alongside them. The Clovis culture, known for its distinctive stone spear points and effective big-game hunting strategies, vanished from the archaeological record precisely at the onset of this cold snap. Their tools, once widespread, simply stop appearing. What replaces them are simpler technologies, suggesting not progress, but regression, a population stripped of specialized knowledge. The cause of the Younger Dryas has been debated for decades, but a growing body of evidence points toward a cosmic trigger. Layers dating to the beginning of this period contain elevated concentrations of iridium and platinum, elements rare on Earth's surface but common in extraterrestrial objects. Embedded within these layers are microscopic glass spherules formed when rock melts at extreme temperatures, and nanodiamonds, structures that only emerge under immense pressure. These materials are consistent with high-energy impacts. The leading hypothesis suggests that fragments of a large comet struck the Earth primarily over North America, igniting continent-wide fires and instantly melting vast portions of glacial ice. The sudden release of fresh water into the North Atlantic disrupted ocean circulation, particularly the conveyor system that distributes heat across the planet. When this circulation faltered, the northern hemisphere plunged back into deep cold. Charcoal layers stretching across millions of square kilometers support this scenario. They indicate fires so widespread they could only have been ignited by an event far more powerful than lightning or human activity. Some estimates suggest that up to 10% of Earth's terrestrial biomass burned during this period. Forests vanished, soil eroded, food webs collapsed. For any advanced coastal societies that may have existed at the time, the consequences would have been terminal. Tsunamis triggered by impact striking ice sheets would have devastated shorelines. Rising seas from rapid glacial melt would have drowned settlements already weakened by cold and famine. What survived would not have been cities or institutions, but scattered humans clinging to life. This explains why the archaeological record before and after the Younger Dryas looks fractured. Evidence of organized societies, if they existed, would have been erased not by conquest but by physics. Stone structures would have been buried under sediment. Wooden architecture would have rotted away. Metals, if used, would corrode and scatter. Within a few generations, even the memory of such societies would fade into legend. Yet the end of the Younger Dryas is just as strange as its beginning. Around 11,700 years ago, temperatures rebounded with similar abruptness. Ice retreated, sea levels stabilized, and ecosystems recovered. Almost immediately, humans began building again. Agriculture appeared independently in multiple regions. Permanent settlements emerged. Monumental architecture followed. This timing is too precise to ignore. Göbekli Tepe rose in southeastern Anatolia only centuries after the cold ended, displaying massive stone pillars arranged with deliberate symbolic intent. The builders were supposedly hunter-gatherers, yet the scale of the construction demands coordinated labor, planning, and shared belief systems. It looks less like an invention and more like a resurfacing. The Younger Dryas was not an isolated anomaly. It fits a broader pattern of abrupt climate oscillations embedded within longer ice age cycles. These oscillations demonstrate that Earth's climate can shift violently without gradual warning. When thresholds are crossed, feedback loops accelerate change beyond human response times. What makes this period especially unsettling is how close it sits to the foundations of modern civilization. The warm interval we live in began immediately after. Everything we recognize as history unfolded in the aftermath of that reset. Writing, cities, states, science, and technology all exist downstream from a catastrophe that nearly erased humanity's momentum. This reframes the idea of progress. Civilization may not be a natural outcome of intelligence, but a temporary alignment between human capability and planetary calm. When that calm breaks, complexity dissolves. The Younger Dryas demonstrates that Earth can revoke stability abruptly, without regard for what depends on it. If such an event occurred today, the impact would be magnified beyond comparison. Modern civilization depends on global supply chains, stable climates, and predictable seasons. Agriculture feeds billions only because climate patterns remain within narrow tolerances. A sudden temperature collapse of even a few degrees would destabilize food systems worldwide. The lesson buried in ice and ash is not merely historical, it is structural. Civilization does not sit above nature, it balances on it, and when the balance fails, the reset is ruthless. The Younger Dryas stands as a reminder that the ground beneath our achievements is neither permanent nor forgiving. It has shifted before it can shift again. 70,000 years ago, Earth came closer to erasing humanity than at any other known moment in our existence. This was not a slow decline stretched across centuries, but a sudden planetary crisis triggered by a single geological event of almost unimaginable scale. On the island of Sumatra, a volcano now known as Toba erupted with a force so extreme it reshaped the global environment and nearly ended our species. To grasp its magnitude, it helps to imagine every major volcanic eruption in recorded history combined into one event, then multiplied several thousand times. The Toba eruption expelled roughly 2,800 cubic kilometers of ash and rock into the atmosphere. By comparison, the eruption of Mount St. Helens, which devastated parts of the northwestern United States in 1980, released about 1 cubic kilometer. Toba was not simply larger, it belonged to an entirely different category of destruction. The explosion carved out a caldera nearly 100 kilometers long, which later filled with water to form Lake Toba, the largest volcanic lake on Earth. The true devastation, however, unfolded after the eruption ended. Vast quantities of sulfur dioxide entered the stratosphere, forming a reflective aerosol veil that blocked sunlight worldwide. Global temperatures dropped by an estimated 3 to 5 degrees Celsius almost immediately, with some regions experiencing far greater cooling. This triggered what scientists call a volcanic winter, a period during which photosynthesis collapses, ecosystems unravel, and food chains disintegrate. For 6 to 10 years, the planet remained locked in darkness and cold. Crops failed where agriculture existed in primitive forms, wild plants stopped growing, animal populations crashed. In Southeast Asia, everything within a radius of several thousand kilometers of the eruption was annihilated outright by ashfall meters thick, hot enough to incinerate forests and suffocate any life unable to flee. Beyond this zone of total destruction, the slower killer took over. With sunlight reduced and temperatures suppressed, habitats that had supported humans for tens of thousands of years became unlivable. Survival required either extraordinary adaptability or pure luck. Genetic evidence reveals just how narrow that survival margin was. Studies of mitochondrial DNA, which traces maternal ancestry, and Y chromosome diversity, which traces paternal lines, show a dramatic bottleneck around the time of the Toba eruption. A bottleneck occurs when a population shrinks so drastically that genetic diversity collapses. In this case, the data suggests the global human population may have fallen to as few as 2,000 breeding individuals, possibly fewer. To put that in perspective, every one of the more than 8 billion people alive today may descend from a group small enough to fit inside a modest stadium. This extreme reduction left a permanent mark on our species. Modern humans exhibit unusually low genetic diversity compared to other large mammals, a signature consistent with a near-extinction event. These survivors did not endure comfortably. They likely clustered in ecological refuges, regions where geography or access to marine resources softened the impact of the volcanic winter. Eastern Africa, with its Rift Valley lakes and coastal zones rich in seafood, may have sheltered some groups. Coastal South Asia, where fishing and shellfish gathering could continue even when land-based food failed, may have sheltered others. Life in these refugees would have been brutal. Small bands competed for limited resources, watching members die from starvation, exposure, and disease. cultural traditions eroded under constant stress. Art, ritual, and experimentation became luxuries few could afford. Knowledge narrowed to what directly aided survival. The archaeological record reflects this collapse. Stone tools dated to before the Toba eruption show regional diversity and technical sophistication across Africa and Eurasia. After the ash layer associated with Toba appears in sediments, artifacts become scarce. For thousands of years, evidence of human activity thins dramatically. When tools reappear in greater numbers, they often represent simplified technologies with little clear continuity to what came before. This suggests not a gradual evolution, but a cultural reset. Whatever complexity human societies had begun to develop before Toba was largely erased. Techniques, symbolic systems, and regional traditions vanished along with the people who carried them. Some researchers believe this event played a role in shaping which human lineages survived. At the time, anatomically modern humans were not the only members of the human family. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other archaic humans occupied parts of Eurasia. The volcanic winter may have affected these populations differently, depending on geography and adaptability. Modern humans in Africa may have possessed subtle behavioral advantages, such as more flexible social structures or broader diets that improved survival odds under extreme stress. When populations began to recover, these advantages could have allowed modern humans to expand while other groups dwindled or were absorbed genetically. In this way, Toba may have helped determine which humans inherited the planet. What makes this event especially disturbing is how little it took. No asteroid impact, no global flood, no cosmic anomaly beyond the Earth itself. A single volcano acting according to geological processes that still exist today nearly erased our species. And Toba is not unique. Earth hosts other supervolcanoes capable of similar eruptions. Beneath Yellowstone National Park lies a magma chamber that has produced 3 massive eruptions in the last 2 million years. The most recent occurred 640,000 years ago. These events do not follow human schedules, but they do recur. The lesson of Toba is not merely that humanity is fragile, but that civilization is optional from the planet's perspective. Intelligence does not guarantee continuity. Culture does not guarantee memory. Survival, when it happens at all, often comes stripped of context and ambition. When the ash finally settled and sunlight returned, the survivors of Toba did not rebuild what had been lost. They could not. Too much knowledge had vanished. Instead, humanity restarted from a narrower genetic and cultural base. Everything that followed migration out of Africa, symbolic art, agriculture, cities, emerged after this reset, not before it. This forces an uncomfortable reconsideration of human uniqueness. Our achievements may not be the product of uninterrupted progress, but of repeated near-death experiences. We are not the species that advanced steadily. We are the species that barely survived again and again and rebuilt without remembering how many times we had done so before. Not all planetary resets arrive as sudden explosions or frozen decades. Some unfold with mechanical patience, driven by celestial geometry rather than violence, yet their long-term effects are just as destructive to civilization. These are the slow resets written into Earth's orbit itself, cycles so reliable they can be calculated tens of thousands of years in advance. Long before humans understood climate, a Serbian mathematician named Milutin Milankovic demonstrated that subtle shifts in Earth's movement through space control the advance and retreat of ice ages, setting the tempo for habitability on this planet. Three interlocking motions govern these cycles. The first is eccentricity, the gradual change in the shape of Earth's orbit from nearly circular to slightly oval over a period of about 100,000 years. When the orbit becomes more elliptical, seasonal contrasts intensify, affecting how much solar energy reaches the planet at different times of year. The second is axial tilt, the angle at which Earth leans relative to the Sun, oscillating between about 22 and 24.5 degrees every 41,000 years. This tilt determines the strength of seasons. The third is precession, a slow wobble of Earth's axis, similar to the motion of a spinning top, completing a cycle roughly every 26,000 years. Individually, these shifts seem insignificant. Together they determine whether ice sheets expand or retreat. When their effects align, summers become too cool to melt winter snow at high latitudes. Year after year, snow accumulates, compresses into ice, and spreads outward. This is how ice ages begin, not abruptly, but inexorably. Over the past 800,000 years, ice cores reveal a striking pattern. Approximately every 100,000 years, Earth enters a glacial period lasting around 90,000 years. These long, cold phases are punctuated by brief, warm intervals, interglacials, lasting 10 to 15,000 years. Civilization exists only in these short windows. The Holocene, the warm period we live in now, began about 11,700 years ago, immediately after the Younger Dryas ended. During glacial maxima, conditions for human life are brutally constrained. Ice sheets up to a kilometre thick blanket northern North America, Scandinavia, and much of northern Europe. Sea levels drop by as much as 120 meters as water becomes locked in ice. Vast regions that today support hundreds of millions of people become uninhabitable wastelands of ice and tundra. Human populations retreat toward the equator and into ecological refuges. Land bridges emerge where oceans recede, connecting continents and allowing migration, but these routes are harsh and temporary. Resources become scarce, competition intensifies, population numbers shrink dramatically. Estimates suggest that during peak glacial periods, the total human population on Earth may have numbered only a few million at most. Agriculture cannot function in such conditions. Growing seasons are too short, soils are poor, and temperatures fluctuate unpredictably. Humanity is forced back into hunting and gathering, relying on animals and plants that themselves struggle to survive. Large, stable settlements become impossible. Knowledge accumulation slows, then stops. What makes these orbital-driven resets particularly destructive is not just the cold, but instability. Ice cores show that within glacial periods, climate can oscillate violently through events known as Dansgaard-Oeschger and Heinrich events. During a Dansgaard-Oeschger event, temperatures in the North Atlantic can rise by 10 to 15 degrees Celsius in just a few decades, then crash again just as quickly. Heinrich events occur when massive ice sheets destabilize and release armadas of icebergs into the ocean, disrupting currents and triggering severe regional cooling. For human populations, these rapid swings are devastating. Just as groups adapt to one climate regime, it vanishes. Migration routes open, then close. Habitats appear, then disappear. Survival favors flexibility over permanence, improvisation over infrastructure. Any attempt at early civilization during these long cycles would be repeatedly erased. Even if humans reached levels of social organization approaching agriculture or proto-urban life during warm interludes, the return of ice would force abandonment. Over tens of thousands of years, this process would grind down complexity, leaving little more than stone tools and scattered bones behind. Transitions between glacial and interglacial periods add another layer of destruction. When ice sheets melt, they do not do so gently. Vast glacial lakes form behind ice dams, holding volumes of fresh water comparable to modern seas. When these dams fail, floods of biblical scale race across continents, carving landscapes and raising sea levels meters at a time. For coastal populations living on exposed continental shelves during low sea levels, these floods are catastrophic. The melting at the end of the last ice age submerged enormous tracts of land. Areas now underwater, such as the Sunda Shelf in Southeast Asia or the plains beneath the North Sea, were once fertile regions supporting human communities. As oceans rose, these lands vanished. Cities, if they existed, were drowned and buried under sediment. Only myths remained. This cyclical drowning explains why so much of humanity's deep past appears missing. Archaeology focuses on land that still exists. It rarely explores the shallow seas where early coastal societies would have thrived. If civilizations rose during previous interglacials, their most advanced centers now lie beneath tens of meters of water, inaccessible and invisible. The predictability of Milankovitch cycles makes them more unsettling than random disasters. Unlike volcanoes or impacts, they are guaranteed. The question is not whether another glacial period will come, but when. By most measures, the Holocene is already mature. Previous interglacials did not last indefinitely. Some models suggest that without human-induced greenhouse warming, Earth might already be sliding toward cooling. Ironically, the same industrial activity that threatens modern ecosystems may be temporarily delaying the next ice age. This does not cancel the cycle, it distorts it, introducing new instabilities whose outcomes remain uncertain. Modern civilization has never experienced a true glacial onset. Our infrastructure, agriculture, and population density evolved entirely within a stable climate window. We assume seasons will arrive on schedule, rivers will flow, and coastlines will remain where they are. The orbital cycles offer no such guarantees. Seen in this context, history looks less like a story of human triumph and more like a series of narrow escapes. Civilization blooms during brief moments of planetary mercy, then is dismantled by forces operating far beyond human control. The ice does not care how advanced a society becomes, it advances anyway. Milankovitch cycles do not destroy civilization in a single dramatic moment. They dismantle it patiently, layer by layer, over generations. By the time the process is complete, little remains to indicate that complexity ever existed. The planet resets quietly, methodically, and completely, preparing the stage for whatever comes next. When the ice retreated and oceans rose, the destruction did not announce itself with fire or ash. It arrived quietly, relentlessly, measured in meters of water that advanced generation after generation, erasing the places humans were most likely to build and remember. Throughout the last glacial maximum, sea levels sat more than 100 meters lower than today, exposing vast continental shelves that are now hidden beneath shallow seas. These were not marginal lands, they were some of the most fertile, resource-rich environments on the planet, natural magnets for human settlement. Coastlines during this period extended far beyond their modern boundaries. River valleys stretched outward across what are now seabeds, creating deltas rich in fish, birds, plants, and fresh water. These zones offered stable food supplies, predictable seasons, and access to trade routes along water. If complex societies were to emerge before the end of the last ice age, these coastal plains would have been the most logical places for them to do so. As the climate warmed after the ice age began to end, meltwater poured back into the oceans. At first, the rise was gradual, slow enough that communities could adapt by moving inland, but this calm was punctuated by sudden surges. During events known as meltwater pulses, global sea levels rose several meters in a few centuries, sometimes faster. For people living near the shore, this would have felt like a slow invasion that periodically turned catastrophic. Entire regions disappeared. The Sunda Shelf, which once connected modern-day Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and Vietnam into a single landmass the size of India, drowned beneath the rising seas. The Sahul Shelf, linking Australia and New Guinea, fragmented into islands. In Europe, the land known as Doggerland, once a broad plain connecting Britain to mainland Europe, was swallowed by the North Sea. Any settlements there are now submerged, scattered, or buried under layers of sediment. This process did not merely relocate populations, it erased evidence. Coastal architecture, ports and infrastructure vanished underwater. Organic materials decomposed. Stone structures collapsed and were covered by silt. Over thousands of years, shifting currents and sediments obscured what remained. When modern archaeology surveys the land, it sees gaps and assumes absence, not realizing that entire chapters lie offshore. In recent decades, underwater exploration has begun to challenge this assumption. Divers and sonar surveys have revealed anomalous structures beneath the waves that defy simple geological explanation. Off the coast of Japan, near the island of Yonaguni, massive stone formations descend into the sea in sharp steps and terraces. The surfaces are flat, the angles precise, the scale monumental. Some features resemble staircases, platforms, and even road-like channels. Geologists argue that natural fracturing can create straight lines in rock, and in isolation, this is true. But the cumulative geometry at Yonaguni strains coincidence. Right angles repeat. Symmetry emerges. The structure extends over more than 100 meters, with features that appear deliberately shaped. If artificial, it would have been built when sea levels were far lower, placing its construction at least 10,000 years ago. Across the Indian Ocean, near the coast of Gujarat, marine archaeologists have identified submerged structures near the ancient city of Dwarka. Stone walls, foundations, and pottery fragments rest up to 40 meters underwater. Radiocarbon dating of associated materials suggests ages that predate known historical periods. Intriguingly, Dwarka appears in ancient Indian epics as a great city consumed by the sea, a story long dismissed as myth. The ruins raise the possibility that the myth preserves a distorted memory of real events. The Mediterranean tells a similar story. Beneath its waters lie submerged harbors, buildings, and roadways. Many date to known civilizations like Rome or Greece, sunken due to earthquakes or gradual subsidence. Others, however, rest at depths inconsistent with these explanations. Their placement aligns more closely with sea levels from the early Holocene before the final rise of the oceans stabilized coastlines. Even more controversial are sonar images from deep waters near Cuba, showing geometric formations at depths exceeding 600 meters. If artificial, these structures would predate the last ice age by tens of thousands of years. Such depths challenge conventional timelines so profoundly that most researchers remain cautious, attributing the formations to natural processes until direct exploration is possible. Skepticism is necessary, but dismissal can be premature. The pattern emerging across the globe is consistent. Structures with rectilinear geometry appear at depths corresponding to ancient shorelines. Legends across cultures describe lost coastal cities swallowed by the sea. Geological data confirms rapid sea level rise capable of destroying them. What is missing is not evidence, but access. Underwater archaeology is expensive, technologically demanding, and still in its infancy compared to land-based excavation. Most of the continental shelves where early civilizations would have thrived remain unexplored. What little has been found suggests we are only seeing fragments. The loss of these coastal worlds would have amplified cultural amnesia. Survivors fleeing inland would carry memories of destruction but leave behind physical proof. Over generations, stories would compress into myth. Great cities would become divine realms. Engineers would become gods. Floods would become acts of cosmic judgment. This explains why so many ancient cultures speak of lost golden ages and sunken lands. Plato's account of Atlantis, often ridiculed, describes a powerful maritime civilization destroyed by floods and earthquakes. Whether literal or symbolic, it aligns with the pattern of coastal annihilation following rapid sea rise. Similar stories appear in Sumerian, Mesoamerican, and Polynesian traditions. The end of the Ice Age was not a universal dawn, it was a culling. While inland regions benefited from warming climates, coastal societies paid the price. Civilization did not begin after the flood. It survived it, fragmented, diminished, and forced to rebuild away from the sea that had once sustained it. Modern coastlines give the illusion of permanence. Cities sprawl along shores as if the ocean were fixed. But the geological record shows otherwise. Sea levels are not static. They respond to ice, temperature, and time. The water always returns. If earlier civilizations were erased by rising seas, then the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It is the expected outcome of a planetary reset conducted by water rather than fire. The drowned shelves of the world may hold the true, deep history of humanity, sealed beneath waves, waiting for a future capable of remembering what the past was forced to forget. In the frozen ground of Siberia and Alaska, the Earth has preserved evidence so unsettling that it challenges every comfortable assumption about how extinction happens. Emerging from melting permafrost are bodies of woolly mammoths so intact they appear almost recent, their skin, hair, and even internal organs preserved by an instant freeze. These animals did not decay, they did not starve slowly, they were stopped in time. Some of these mammoths still contain undigested plants in their stomachs, grasses and flowering species that only grow in temperate environments. Botanists examining this material identified buttercups, herbs, and steppe grasses that require mild seasonal conditions. This detail is crucial. It means these animals were not living in an Arctic wasteland when they died. They were grazing calmly in landscapes capable of supporting lush vegetation. Then something happened that killed them so fast digestion never finished. To freeze a 6-ton animal with a thick layer of fat and dense fur before decomposition begins requires a catastrophic temperature drop. not a seasonal cooling, not a gradual ice age. The internal tissues of these mammoths suggest freezing occurred within hours or days, demanding temperatures plunging to -40 degrees Celsius or lower almost instantly. This is not how climate normally behaves. The preservation is so complete that in some cases liquid blood was reportedly found inside frozen cavities, shielded from ice crystals by rapid cooling. This level of preservation mirrors what modern cryogenic science attempts to achieve artificially. Nature accomplished it violently without warning. These mammoths were not isolated victims. They died alongside entire ecosystems. Between roughly 14,000 and 10,000 years ago, coinciding with the Younger Dryas period, dozens of large mammal species vanished across the northern hemisphere. Mammoths, mastodons, woolly rhinoceroses, cave lions, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths, American horses, camels, and massive bears all disappeared within a narrow time frame. This extinction wave was global in scope and abrupt in execution. These animals had survived multiple previous glacial cycles, enduring colder conditions than those that followed. What they could not survive was speed. Their extinction aligns with sudden environmental shocks, not long-term adaptation failure. Traditional explanations struggle here. Overhunting by humans cannot account for the simultaneous collapse of megafauna across continents, especially when human populations were sparse and lacked the capacity to exterminate millions of animals spread over vast territories. Gradual climate warming also fails, since these species had endured warming phases repeatedly in the past. What remains is catastrophe. One hypothesis links these frozen mammoths directly to the same cosmic event suspected of triggering the Younger Dryas. If fragments of a comet struck ice sheets and land masses, the immediate effects would include massive shock waves, firestorms, and atmospheric disruption. Dust and vaporized ice could block sunlight, while destabilized air currents could force polar air masses southward at unprecedented speed. In such a scenario, regions that were temperate one day could become lethally cold the next. Mammoths grazing peacefully could be overtaken by a wall of freezing air, flash-freezing bodies before they had time to flee or adapt. This would explain both the stomach contents and the preservation state. Another controversial but intriguing theory involves rapid shifts in Earth's rotational or magnetic dynamics. Some researchers have proposed that extreme external forces could trigger sudden changes in atmospheric circulation or even crustal displacement, repositioning land masses relative to the poles. In such a case, areas previously located in temperate latitudes could be thrust into polar conditions over a geologically brief period. This idea remains debated, but it offers a striking explanation for why animals died in climates inconsistent with their final resting places. Mammoths frozen in what is now Arctic tundra may not have lived in Arctic conditions when they last ate. The geological record supports the notion of sudden violence. In Siberia, enormous bone fields contain the remains of countless animals mixed with uprooted trees and chaotic debris, suggesting massive flood-like forces or atmospheric shock events. These are not typical death assemblages formed over centuries. They look like snapshots of destruction. What makes the mammoths especially important is what they reveal about the nature of planetary resets. These were not slow transitions that rewarded adaptation. They were abrupt, overwhelming, and indiscriminate. Evolutionary advantages meant nothing when environmental parameters changed faster than biology could respond. Mammoths were perfectly adapted for cold. Thick fur, subcutaneous fat, efficient heat retention, and migratory behavior had allowed them to dominate northern ecosystems for hundreds of thousands of years. Yet when the final reset arrived, none of these traits mattered. The conditions exceeded survivable limits. This is the critical lesson. When Earth resets violently, specialization becomes a weakness. Size becomes a liability. Dependence on stable ecosystems becomes fatal. The same principle applies beyond biology. Human societies, especially complex ones, are similarly specialized. They depend on stable climates, predictable seasons, intact supply chains, and accumulated knowledge. Like mammoths, they are optimized for specific conditions. When those conditions collapse abruptly, complexity accelerates failure instead of preventing it. The frozen mammoths stand as warnings sealed in ice. They show that extinction can arrive without transition, without negotiation, and without regard for previous success. They demonstrate that planetary systems can flip states far faster than living systems can adjust. As permafrost continues to melt today, more of these ancient bodies emerge, not as curiosities, but as messages from a previous reset. Each preserved animal is evidence that Earth does not always change gradually. Sometimes it convulses. The mammoths did not fail. The environment betrayed them, and in that betrayal lies a mirror. If a species that mastered the ice could be erased in days, then technological intelligence offers no immunity. It merely delays the moment when conditions exceed tolerance. Planetary resets do not care about dominance, they care about thresholds. Once crossed, survival becomes arbitrary. The mammoths remind us that the difference between thriving and vanishing can be measured not in centuries, but in hours. When the great animals vanished, the land itself changed. The extinction of megafauna was not merely a loss of impressive creatures, but a fundamental rewiring of Earth's ecosystems. These animals were not passive inhabitants of their environments. They were engineers, shaping landscapes through grazing, migration, and sheer physical force. When they disappeared during the late Pleistocene resets, the consequences rippled outward for thousands of years, altering the conditions under which human civilization would later arise. Mammoths and mastodons pushed over trees, maintaining open grasslands that supported diverse plant and animal communities. Giant ground sloths dispersed seeds from large fruited plants that depended on massive digestive systems to reproduce. Herds of large herbivores recycled nutrients through soil, preventing forests from closing in and sustaining fertile plains. When these animals died out, those systems collapsed. Grasslands shrank. Forests expanded into areas once kept open by grazing. Fire regimes changed as vegetation patterns shifted. Some plant species that had co-evolved with megafauna vanished alongside them, unable to reproduce effectively without their ancient partners. Ecosystems reorganized into entirely new configurations. This ecological reset created both loss and opportunity. Medium-sized animals such as deer, elk, and bison expanded into niches once dominated by giants. Smaller predators adapted to new prey. Birds and rodents diversified rapidly. But the most dramatic expansion belonged to humans. With megafauna gone, landscapes became safer and more predictable for small, organized human groups. The removal of massive herbivores reduced competition for vegetation and eliminated predators capable of destroying early settlements. In a sense, the extinction event cleared the board, opening ecological space for a new dominant species. This timing matters. Agriculture emerged shortly after the last major megafaunal collapse. Farming requires stability, not just climate stability, but ecological stability. Large animals capable of trampling crops, destroying irrigation systems, or consuming vast amounts of vegetation would have made sustained agriculture nearly impossible. Their absence lowered the threshold for domestication. Early farmers began shaping ecosystems intentionally, replacing the unconscious engineering once performed by megafauna. Forests were cleared, fields were planted, rivers were diverted. Humans became the new ecological force, replicating some functions of extinct animals while amplifying others beyond natural limits. This transformation came at a cost. Ecosystems engineered by megafauna were resilient, having evolved over millions of years. Human-managed systems were productive but fragile, dependent on continuous maintenance and stable conditions. The same resets that erased megafauna would later threaten human societies built on these artificial landscapes. The extinction patterns themselves reveal important clues. Large animals suffered disproportionately. Species weighing more than 40 kilograms experienced extinction rates as high as 75% in some regions. Smaller animals fared far better. This size bias indicates that whatever forces drove the reset targeted traits associated with largeness, high food requirements, slow reproduction, and dependence on wide territories. Specialization was another liability. Animals adapted to narrow ecological niches vanished more readily than generalists. Saber-toothed cats, which relied on large prey, disappeared when those prey collapsed. Giant sloths that fed on specific plants could not adapt quickly enough when vegetation changed. Generalists like wolves, bears, and crows survived by switching diets and habitats. Humans survived because they are the ultimate generalists. They eat almost anything. They inhabit nearly any environment. They invent tools and strategies faster than biology alone would allow. Even so, genetic bottlenecks show that survival was often a narrow escape, not a guaranteed outcome. Geography also shaped survival. Africa retained more of its megafauna than any other continent. Elephants, rhinos, hippos, and giraffes still roam there today. One reason is coevolution. African animals evolved alongside humans for millions of years, developing behaviors that reduced vulnerability to hunting and disturbance. In contrast, megafauna in the Americas and Australia encountered humans suddenly, often during periods of climatic stress, and were less able to adapt. This suggests that extinctions were not driven by a single cause, but by convergence. Abrupt climate shifts destabilized ecosystems. Human pressure, even at low population levels, pushed already stressed species past tipping points. Catastrophe set the stage, and biology followed. After each reset, ecosystems did not simply return to their previous state. They reorganized. New dominant species emerged. New balances formed. These transitions took thousands of years, but their direction was shaped by the absence of what had been lost. For humans, this meant inheriting a world fundamentally different from the one in which our ancestors evolved. The landscapes that supported early civilizations were already products of extinction. Forests, grasslands, and animal communities had been simplified. Complexity had been stripped away, leaving systems more easily controlled but less robust. This fragility remains today. Modern ecosystems, heavily shaped by human activity, resemble post-reset landscapes rather than ancient ones. Biodiversity is reduced, food webs are shorter, stability depends on constant intervention. In this sense, modern civilization exists in a permanent post-catastrophe state, managing the aftermath of ancient resets. The pattern repeats across deep time. Each mass extinction clears ecological space. Survivors diversify, new dominant forms arise, but dominance is temporary. Conditions change again, the cycle resets. What distinguishes the current era is awareness. For the first time, a dominant species can recognize the pattern unfolding beneath its feet. We can see that extinction is not an anomaly but a recurring feature of life on Earth. We can see that stability is borrowed, not owned. The disappearance of the megafauna was not merely a prehistoric tragedy. It was a prerequisite for the world we inhabit. Without it, agriculture might never have taken hold, cities might never have grown, civilization as we know it might not exist. But this inheritance carries a warning. The same processes that cleared the path for humanity did not stop operating. They continue indifferent to which species currently holds power. The mammoths once shaped the land, then they vanished. Humans shape the land now. The land will shape the future. Every ecosystem bears the scars of previous resets. Every dominant species believes briefly that its dominance is permanent. The megafauna learned otherwise. The planet has not changed its rules since then. After each planetary reset, humanity did not simply lose numbers, it lost memory. This loss was deeper and more enduring than population collapse or technological regression. It was a systemic erasure of cultural continuity, a phenomenon that can be described as collective amnesia. When societies are shattered by catastrophe, what vanishes first is not stone or bone, but knowledge itself, the invisible scaffolding that allows civilizations to function. Complex knowledge requires stable conditions to survive. Astronomy depends on generations of observation. Architecture depends on accumulated techniques, shared measurements, and long-term planning. Writing systems depend on materials, specialists, and institutions that justify their use. When populations are reduced to scattered groups fighting for survival, these conditions evaporate instantly. A survivor fleeing famine or cold does not carry libraries. They carry stories. Over time, those stories compress. Precision erodes. Technical understanding dissolves into symbolism. What was once engineering becomes myth. What was once historical record becomes divine legend. This pattern explains one of the most puzzling features of ancient history, the sudden appearance of advanced knowledge without clear developmental precursors. In Mesopotamia, the Sumerians emerged with writing, mathematics based on complex numerical systems, precise astronomical calendars, and monumental architecture. These did not appear after millennia of visible experimentation. They appear abruptly, fully formed. The same pattern repeats elsewhere. In Egypt, monumental stone architecture emerges almost immediately at the dawn of dynastic history. The Great Pyramid displays geometric accuracy and astronomical alignment that still challenge modern engineers. Its builders used techniques that seem to arrive without a clear developmental trail. Göbekli Tepe deepens the mystery. Massive stone pillars carved with symbolic animals were erected more than 11,000 years ago, before agriculture was supposedly established. Coordinating the labor to quarry, transport, and erect stones weighing tens of tons requires social organization, planning, and shared symbolic systems. Yet the archaeological context suggests these builders were still hunter-gatherers. The simplest explanation is not spontaneous genius, but inheritance. Knowledge carried across resets does not survive intact. It survives fragmented, encoded in ritual, myth, and symbolic practice. When conditions stabilize, fragments can be reassembled, sometimes imperfectly, sometimes with astonishing accuracy. Flood myths offer a striking example. Nearly every ancient culture tells a story of a great deluge that destroyed an earlier world. In Mesopotamia, Utnapishtim survives a divine flood by building a vessel. In the Hebrew tradition, Noah receives a warning and preserves life through the waters. In India, Manu is warned by a fish. In China, flood legends describe entire civilizations submerged. Indigenous American and Australian traditions tell similar stories. These myths share core elements: a prior world, a catastrophic flood, a small group of survivors, and a rebirth. The similarities are too specific to dismiss as coincidence. They align closely with geological evidence for massive flooding events at the end of the last ice age, when melting glaciers raised sea levels and unleashed sudden outbursts from ice-dammed lakes. To people living through such events, the destruction would have felt absolute. The world ended in water. Survival would feel divinely ordained. Over generations, these memories would shed detail but retain emotional truth. Writing systems are especially vulnerable to reset. Literacy requires continuous teaching, materials, and social need. When societies collapse, writing disappears quickly. Oral tradition persists longer, but it cannot preserve technical precision indefinitely. This is why civilizations repeatedly appear to invent writing independently, even though the conceptual leap is enormous. The idea may survive as memory, but the method must be rebuilt. Monumental ruins amplify this amnesia. Survivors may live among structures they cannot replicate or understand. Over time, these ruins are attributed to gods, giants, or lost ages. The builders are no longer remembered as human. Their achievements become supernatural. This explains why ancient texts often describe ancestors with impossible lifespans or divine abilities. Such figures may represent memories of people who lived before a reset, whose skills seemed magical to descendants struggling to rebuild. What was once engineering becomes mythic power. The process is recursive. Each reset strips humanity of memory, forcing it to rediscover concepts it once mastered. Fire, agriculture, architecture, astronomy, mathematics, navigation, metallurgy, all may have been learned, lost, and relearned multiple times. The archaeological record captures only the most recent cycle. This amnesia is reinforced by geology. Catastrophes bury evidence, floods deposit sediment, volcanoes cover landscapes in ash, glaciers grind stone into dust, oceans rise and swallow coastlines. The physical traces of earlier civilizations are not merely hidden, they are destroyed or rendered inaccessible. The deeper the reset, the deeper the forgetting. A civilization erased by conquest may leave ruins and texts. A civilization erased by planetary forces leaves almost nothing. What survives are echoes embedded in myth, ritual, and symbolic architecture. This raises an unsettling possibility. Humanity may not be building civilization for the first time. We may be rebuilding it again, with no memory of how many times we have done so before. Each iteration mistakes recovery for origin. Modern humans pride themselves on record-keeping and data storage, believing digital memory will outlast any collapse. But digital systems are among the most fragile. They depend on electricity, infrastructure, and constant maintenance. Without power, servers decay faster than stone. Knowledge encoded digitally could vanish in years, not centuries. The cycle of forgetting is not theoretical. It has happened repeatedly on smaller scales. After the collapse of the Western Roman Empire, engineering knowledge disappeared, concrete recipes were lost, roads deteriorated, literacy declined. Europe took centuries to recover capabilities once taken for granted. Scale that process up to planetary catastrophe, and the result is near total erasure. Collective amnesia is not a failure of intelligence. It is an emergent property of survival under extreme stress. When humanity is reduced to its core, memory becomes a luxury. Only what keeps people alive survives. The most dangerous illusion is believing that this time is different, that our knowledge is permanent, that our systems are immune. History suggests the opposite. Each cycle produces the same confidence just before it breaks. What remains after every reset is not truth, but story. And from those stories, humanity rebuilds, unaware that it is retracing steps walked many times before, convinced each time that it is walking them for the first time. When history is viewed through the lens of collapse and recovery, the idea of a single, uninterrupted human story begins to dissolve. Instead, patterns emerge that resemble layers rather than lines, each layer representing a rise, a fall, and a partial forgetting. Beneath the most recent civilizations lie traces that do not fit neatly into accepted timelines, anomalies that suggest advanced behavior appearing far earlier than expected, then disappearing without clear descendants. One of the most persistent anomalies is precision. Ancient structures across the world exhibit levels of geometric accuracy and astronomical alignment that appear disproportionate to the technologies officially attributed to their builders. Stone blocks weighing dozens of tons are cut with flatness and right angles difficult to reproduce even with modern machinery. Alignments track solstices, equinoxes, and stellar positions with remarkable consistency across continents. These are often explained as isolated achievements, products of ingenuity emerging independently in multiple places, but when viewed alongside evidence of repeated planetary resets, another interpretation becomes possible. These structures may not represent first attempts but last survivors, the durable remnants of knowledge refined over long periods before being erased. Stone, unlike writing or wood, survives catastrophe. It resists fire, water, and time. If a civilization anticipated collapse intentionally or intuitively, it might encode its most important knowledge in stone, aligning structures with the sky to preserve astronomical information across generations. Such alignments would remain intelligible even after language was lost. This idea reframes ancient monuments as messages rather than origins. They are not beginnings. They are markers left behind by cultures aware of impermanence, cultures that understood the sky not as mythology but as a clock governing catastrophe. Astronomy has always been humanity's longest memory. The motion of stars changes slowly. Precession shifts constellations over tens of thousands of years. A culture tracking these changes would understand time on scales far beyond a single lifetime. Such knowledge would be invaluable for anticipating climate cycles tied to orbital mechanics. If fragments of this astronomical understanding survived resets through ritual and architecture, later civilizations could inherit precise observations without understanding their origin. The knowledge would appear sudden, almost miraculous, when in reality it was ancient. This could explain why early civilizations often placed such importance on the sky. Temples, pyramids, and ceremonial centers consistently align with celestial events. These alignments are not decorative, they are functional, encoding seasonal cycles, solar extremes and stellar markers critical for agriculture and survival. The consistency of this behavior across cultures separated by oceans suggests inheritance rather than coincidence. Even where myths diverge, the stones point to the same sky. Another anomaly lies in the abrupt emergence of agriculture. Domestication appears independently in multiple regions within a narrow time frame after the last major climate stabilization. Farming requires deep ecological knowledge, long-term planning, and social coordination. It is not an obvious next step for foragers without prolonged experimentation, yet agriculture appears rapidly, as if the conceptual groundwork already existed. This could indicate that knowledge of plant cultivation survived the last reset in fragmentary form, reactivated when conditions allowed. What looks like invention may actually be recovery. The same applies to navigation. Ancient mariners crossed vast oceans using stellar navigation with astonishing accuracy. Polynesian navigators, for example, memorized star paths, ocean swells, and bird behavior to traverse thousands of kilometers without instruments. Such systems imply accumulated observational knowledge refined over generations, not sudden innovation. In a world repeatedly reset, navigation would be one of the most valuable skills to preserve. Survivors scattered by catastrophe would need to move, find new lands, and reconnect. Star-based navigation survives without tools, making it resilient to collapse. Language itself carries echoes of earlier cycles. Certain symbols and motifs recur globally: serpents, floods, world trees, sky gods, underworlds. These may not represent shared imagination, but shared memory distorted by time. When technical explanations are lost, metaphor fills the gap. The serpent that circles the world could represent precession, the slow turning of the sky. The world tree connecting heavens and earth could symbolize the axis of rotation. Flood myths encode sea level rise. Fire from the sky encodes impacts. What sounds symbolic may once have been descriptive. As civilizations rebuild, they reinterpret inherited symbols through new cultural lenses. The original meaning erodes, but the structure remains. Over thousands of years, layers of reinterpretation accumulate, obscuring the initial knowledge while preserving its outline. This layered inheritance explains why some ancient texts seem simultaneously naive and sophisticated. They mix myth with accurate astronomical or mathematical observations. The framework is symbolic, but the data embedded within it is precise. Modern science, focused on written records and continuous development, struggles to account for this hybrid nature. It prefers clean origins. But the planet's history is not clean. It is violent and discontinuous. If human civilization has reset multiple times, then progress is not cumulative across all time. It is cumulative within windows. Each window builds until interrupted. The next window starts again, often rediscovering what was once known. This does not diminish human intelligence. It highlights its resilience. Despite repeated erasure, humanity continues to rebuild complexity. The recurrence of similar solutions across cycles speaks to underlying constraints and shared challenges, but it also reveals a vulnerability. Each cycle forgets the lesson of impermanence. Each believes itself exceptional. Each assumes continuity where none is guaranteed. The anomalies in the archaeological record are not errors, they are scars. They mark points where continuity was severed, where knowledge jumped across gaps rather than flowing smoothly. When these gaps are acknowledged, the past stops looking primitive. It starts looking incomplete. Civilization may not rise from ignorance, but from amnesia. Each era rediscovers fire, the wheel, the plough, the sky, and calls it invention, unaware that these ideas have survived extinction before. The stones remember, the sky remembers, the earth remembers. It is humanity that forgets. When the pattern of planetary resets is followed to its logical conclusion, the most unsettling realization emerges not from the distant past, but from the present. The same forces that erased earlier civilizations have not vanished. They continue to operate, governed by physics, geology, and orbital mechanics that are indifferent to human ambition. The question is no longer whether Earth will reset again, but whether modern civilization can survive the next one. Our world is uniquely vulnerable precisely because of its complexity. 8 billion people depend on tightly synchronized systems, global agriculture calibrated to stable seasons, supply chains stretched across continents, energy grids that must function continuously, and digital networks that store nearly all human knowledge in fragile formats. This interdependence amplifies efficiency, but it also magnifies collapse. Previous societies could fail locally and recover elsewhere. A planetary-scale civilization has no such buffer. When disruption is global, there is nowhere to retreat. Climate instability alone presents a credible reset scenario. The orbital cycles that governed past ice ages continue their slow march. The Holocene, the warm interglacial that allowed agriculture and cities to flourish, has lasted nearly 12,000 years. Past interglacials rarely extended beyond 15,000. By geological standards, this one is aging. Human-driven warming complicates the picture. By injecting vast amounts of carbon into the atmosphere, modern civilization may be delaying the onset of the next glacial period. But delay is not cancellation. Instead, it introduces new instabilities, altered ocean currents, shifting weather extremes, and feedback loops whose long-term outcomes remain uncertain. Rapid climate shifts have historically been far more destructive than slow ones. Crop systems optimized for narrow temperature ranges can fail within a single season. Droughts, floods, and unseasonal freezes destabilize food production, triggering famine, migration, and conflict. These are not hypothetical risks. They are already unfolding in isolated regions. Add to this the threat of sudden geological events. Supervolcanoes like Yellowstone do not erupt often, but when they do, the consequences are global. Ash clouds could shut down air travel, block sunlight, and collapse agriculture across entire hemispheres. The last eruption of this scale occurred before recorded history, but its deposits remain visible across continents. Cosmic impacts represent another wild card. Earth regularly passes through debris fields left by comets. While large impacts are rare, smaller airbursts can still produce regional devastation. The Younger Dryas may have been triggered by such an event. Modern detection systems track many near-Earth objects, but not all, and prediction does not equal prevention. Even more subtle are the cascading effects of infrastructure failure. Modern cities rely on constant power, clean water, and food deliveries. Interrupt any one of these for long enough, and social order erodes rapidly. Knowledge stored digitally becomes inaccessible without electricity. Data centers shut down, communication fragments. In a true global reset, the most advanced tools may become useless overnight. Satellites decay, electronics fail, specialized manufacturing disappears. Survivors would be forced to fall back on the most basic skills, many of which are no longer widely known. This mirrors the past. After each reset, humanity did not rebuild from the highest point reached, but from whatever knowledge survived in human memory. The more abstract and specialized the knowledge, the more likely it was to vanish. Modern civilization assumes that redundancy ensures survival. In reality, redundancy often exists only within the same fragile systems. Backup servers require power. Emergency supply chains require fuel. Institutional memory depends on institutions continuing to exist. What then might survive a reset? Likely the same things that always do: small groups, flexible diets, generalist skills, and oral knowledge. Complex science, advanced engineering, and global coordination would almost certainly collapse. Rebuilding them could take millennia, assuming conditions allow it at all. This does not imply inevitability. Awareness creates options. Unlike previous civilizations, modern humanity understands the forces at play. We can identify risks, model outcomes, and potentially mitigate some dangers. Early warning systems, diversified food sources, decentralized energy, and resilient infrastructure could reduce vulnerability. But mitigation has limits. Orbital mechanics cannot be negotiated with. Geological processes cannot be legislated away. The planet's history shows that certain thresholds, once crossed, trigger changes beyond human control. The greatest danger may be psychological. Every civilization before ours believed itself secure. Confidence precedes collapse because it blinds societies to systemic fragility. The assumption of permanence discourages preparation. Recognizing the cycle does not require abandoning progress, it requires humility. Civilization is not a destination, it is a phase, a temporary alignment between human organization and planetary stability. If the past 100,000 years teach anything, it is that resets do not announce themselves politely. They arrive abruptly or unfold relentlessly, erasing context faster than memory can adapt. Modern humanity stands at a crossroads unknown to its predecessors. We possess unprecedented power and unprecedented vulnerability. We can continue to act as though the future is guaranteed, or we can acknowledge that survival has always been conditional. The ruins of previous cycles lie beneath ice, oceans, and myths. They are not warnings written in language, but in geology. They say the same thing repeatedly. Nothing built on this planet is permanent. Not cities, not knowledge, not dominance. Only the cycle endures. Across every planetary reset, one pattern remains consistent. Survival does not favor the most advanced, but the most adaptable. When environmental thresholds are crossed, intelligence alone offers no protection. What matters is flexibility, redundancy rooted in simplicity, and the ability to function without complex systems. This truth runs counter to modern assumptions, yet it is written clearly across deep time. In previous cycles, the groups that endured were not those with the tallest structures or the most elaborate technologies. They were those able to eat broadly, move quickly, cooperate tightly, and transmit essential knowledge without dependence on infrastructure. These traits are not glamorous, but they are resilient. When food systems collapse and landscapes transform, adaptability becomes the only currency that still holds value. Hunter-gatherer societies, often mischaracterized as primitive, embody this resilience. Their knowledge is ecological rather than mechanical, embedded in seasonal patterns, animal behavior, and local geography. This kind of understanding survives collapse because it lives in people rather than tools. When conditions shift, it migrates, evolves, or compresses, rather than vanishing outright. Agricultural societies gain productivity but lose mobility. Urban societies gain specialization but lose redundancy. Industrial societies gain power but lose independence. Each step up the ladder of complexity increases output while narrowing tolerance for disruption. Civilization repeatedly makes this trade-off, usually without recognizing the long-term cost. The archaeological record suggests early humans understood this balance intuitively. Settlement patterns fluctuate between concentration and dispersal, often tracking climate instability. Periods of growth are followed by fragmentation, as if societies instinctively shed complexity when conditions deteriorate. What appears as regression may in fact be strategic retreat. Ritual and myth play an unexpected role in this process. While technical knowledge is fragile, symbolic knowledge is durable. Stories, songs, and ceremonies encode survival strategies in compressed, memorable forms. Seasonal rituals track climate cycles. Taboos regulate resource use. Origin myths preserve warnings disguised as morality. Flood myths, for example, emphasize preparation, restraint, and attention to natural signs. Stripped of theology, they function as behavioral guides for living near water. Fire myths warn of uncontrolled power. Sky myths preserve astronomical timing essential for planting and migration. Myth becomes a low-bandwidth storage system for high-value information. This durability explains why rebuilding often follows familiar paths. Agriculture re-emerges near rivers, settlements cluster in predictable zones, astronomy regains importance, geometry returns. Humanity is not inventing from nothing, but rediscovering stable solutions to recurring constraints imposed by the planet. The danger lies in forgetting why those solutions mattered. Each cycle inherits tools without inheriting caution. Irrigation is rebuilt without remembering salinization. Cities are rebuilt on floodplains without remembering past inundations. Energy is harnessed without remembering limits. Memory decays faster than ambition. Modern civilization has amplified this risk by separating knowledge from experience. Most people no longer grow food, repair tools, or navigate by natural cues. Survival skills are outsourced to systems assumed to be permanent. When systems fail, individuals lack the context to compensate. This disconnection extends to memory itself. Digital storage allows unprecedented accumulation of data, but at the cost of fragility. Without electricity, servers fall silent. Without maintenance, data corrupts. Without institutional continuity, meaning evaporates. Stone tablets outlast hard drives. Ironically, the most durable knowledge may once again be the least sophisticated. Practical skills, ecological awareness, social cohesion, and adaptability are the traits most likely to survive a reset. Advanced science may persist only if deliberately preserved in resilient, low-tech forms. This raises uncomfortable questions about preparedness, not preparedness for specific disasters, but for collapse as a category. History suggests collapse is not an anomaly but a recurring phase. Designing civilization to endure it requires rethinking priorities. Decentralization increases resilience. Local food systems reduce dependency. Diverse energy sources buffer failure. Knowledge distributed among people rather than concentrated in institutions survives disruption. None of these guarantee survival, but they improve the odds. The challenge is cultural as much as technical. Modern societies value growth, efficiency, and optimization, traits that perform well under stable conditions and fail under stress. Resilience favors slack, redundancy, and restraint, qualities often dismissed as wasteful. Earlier civilizations likely faced the same dilemma. Those that optimized too aggressively may have collapsed faster. Those that tolerated inefficiency may have endured longer. Over time, these differences shape which cultures leave descendants and which leave only ruins. The lesson is not to reject complexity, but to temper it with memory. Memory of fragility. Memory of cycles. Memory that progress is conditional. Across deep time, humanity has survived not by conquering nature, but by adapting to it. When adaptation failed, numbers fell, knowledge narrowed, and the species retreated to its core strengths. Then slowly, it expanded again. The future will demand the same pattern. Whether triggered by climate instability, geological events, or cascading system failures, the next reset will test not our technology, but our adaptability. The question is not whether civilization can be preserved intact, but whether humanity can retain enough continuity to rebuild with awareness rather than ignorance. If there is a way to soften the cycle, it lies not in preventing resets, but in remembering them, in building societies that expect disruption and plan for recovery rather than permanence. The past does not ask for fear. It asks for humility. Survival has never belonged to those who stood tallest. It has always belonged to those who could bend without breaking. When civilizations collapse, the damage does not end with cities falling or populations dispersing. The deeper wound is temporal. Time itself fractures. Generations that follow inherit a world stripped of context, where the past is no longer a continuous chain, but a collection of disconnected fragments. This rupture in continuity shapes how future societies understand reality, often distorting truth into legend and warning into worship. After a reset, survivors rarely know they are survivors. They experience catastrophe as the totality of existence, not as one event in a repeating cycle. Children born after the collapse grow up with no memory of the world that preceded it. For them, scarcity is normal, ruins are natural, and myths are explanations rather than metaphors. Civilization does not feel lost, it feels undiscovered. This is how amnesia becomes generational. Knowledge that required thousands of years to accumulate can vanish in 2 or 3 lifetimes. Precision erodes first. Measurements become approximate, methods become ritualized. Eventually, meaning detaches from function. Astronomy offers a clear example. Tracking celestial cycles requires long-term observation, accurate recording, and intergenerational transmission. After a reset, the original data may be lost, but the importance of the sky remains. Solstices still matter, seasons still shift. Survivors remember that the heavens are important, even if they forget why. Over time, observation becomes ceremony. Markers become temples. Alignments persist, but their purpose is reinterpreted. What once guided planting schedules or warned of long-term climate shifts becomes sacred architecture aligned for the gods. Function survives as form. This pattern appears repeatedly in ancient cultures. Structures aligned with solar and stellar events are explained mythologically, even though the alignments themselves demonstrate precise observational knowledge. The builders may no longer understand the original calculations, but they remember that alignment matters. The same degradation applies to engineering. Techniques for shaping stone, managing water, or constructing stable foundations can survive as traditions long after their theoretical basis is forgotten. Builders follow inherited rules without knowing why they work. When conditions change, These rules may fail, and the knowledge cannot adapt because its reasoning is gone. Writing systems illustrate the fragility of abstract memory. Scripts require literacy, training, and materials. After collapse, literacy often disappears entirely. Oral tradition replaces text, but oral memory compresses and reshapes information to fit human recall. Numbers turn symbolic. Chronology collapses into archetype. This is why ancient histories often exaggerate time. Kings rule for impossibly long spans. Ages last thousands of years. These are not literal claims, but attempts to preserve a sense of deep time without reliable records. Duration becomes mythic scale. Religion often fills the vacuum left by lost explanation. When mechanisms are forgotten, intention is assigned. Natural cycles become divine will. Catastrophes become punishment or renewal. This does not mean belief systems are false. It means they are adaptive, providing coherence when understanding is incomplete. Through this lens, religion is not the opposite of science, but its descendant under stress. It preserves structure when content is lost. It keeps societies oriented around cycles, morality, and memory, even when empirical detail fades. As stability returns, societies rebuild. Surplus allows specialization. Writing re-emerges. Observation resumes. But the rebuilt civilization is not identical to the one that fell. It carries distortions inherited from myth. It misreads ruins. It misdates origins. It mistakes inheritance for invention. This is why history often appears to begin abruptly. Writing seems to emerge suddenly. Cities appear without visible precursors. Technology leaps forward. In reality, these are points where continuity reconnects, where enough stability returns for fragmented knowledge to reassemble into functional systems. What remains missing are the deeper layers buried by catastrophe. Floods, ash, ice, and time hide earlier iterations beneath later ones. Archaeology uncovers what survives best, not what mattered most. Stone outlasts wood. Monuments outlast homes. Elites outlast common people. As a result, the past we reconstruct is biased toward the durable and the dramatic. Everyday knowledge, the kind that sustains life quietly over generations, is rarely preserved, yet it is precisely this knowledge that carries civilizations through resets. This bias reinforces the illusion of sudden origin. We see monuments, but not the centuries of adaptation that preceded them. We see writing, but not the oral frameworks that supported it. We see cities, but not the dispersed networks that made them possible. Understanding this distortion changes how we interpret history. Instead of asking where civilization began, a better question is how many times it restarted. Instead of asking why knowledge appears suddenly, we should ask what survived long enough to be visible. The implications extend to the present. Modern society assumes that recorded history represents the full scope of human experience, but recorded history occupies a narrow slice of time, bounded by the last major reset. Everything before it is filtered through layers of forgetting. This does not mean earlier civilizations were identical to ours or technologically equal. It means they may have been more complex than we assume, adapted to different conditions, and erased by forces unrelated to failure or incompetence. The danger of ignoring this possibility is complacency. When collapse is seen as an anomaly, preparation feels unnecessary. When collapse is understood as cyclical, resilience becomes essential. The continuity we value today, archives, databases, institutions, may not survive the next reset. What will matter is what can be carried through disruption by people themselves, skills that can be taught without tools, knowledge that can be encoded in story, memory that can survive loss of infrastructure. Time will fracture again. It always has. The question is not whether memory will be lost, but what form of memory will endure. Civilizations do not die all at once. They fade into myth, leaving behind stones that future generations mistake for beginnings. And from those stones humanity builds again, convinced each time that history has finally begun. When viewed across deep time, humanity's relationship with catastrophe reveals a paradox. Destruction repeatedly erases civilizations, yet it also clears space for transformation. Each reset annihilates dominant systems, but it also reshapes the ecological and social landscape in ways that make new forms of organization possible. Collapse is not merely an ending, it is a forced transition. After mass extinctions, ecosystems reorganize. Empty niches invite experimentation. Species once constrained by competition expand into new roles. The same dynamic applies to human societies. When centralized power collapses, rigid hierarchies dissolve. Survivors are forced to improvise, adapt, and innovate under radically altered conditions. The end of the last ice age illustrates this clearly. As megafauna disappeared and climate stabilized, humans rapidly diversified their subsistence strategies. Hunting gave way to cultivation in some regions. Nomadism gave way to settlement. These changes were not inevitable, but they were enabled by a world cleared of old constraints. Agriculture itself can be seen as a post-catastrophe adaptation. Large animals that once trampled fields and consumed crops were gone. Landscapes opened, seasonal patterns stabilized. Humans stepped into ecological roles vacated by extinct species, managing plant growth and soil fertility intentionally rather than incidentally. This transition carried risk. Farming tied people to place, making them vulnerable to drought, flood, and disease, but it also supported population growth, specialization, and long-term planning. The trade-off between resilience and productivity shifted once again. Each reset pushes humanity toward a new balance between flexibility and control. Early societies favor mobility, later ones favor structure. Neither is permanent. Catastrophe repeatedly forces a return to fundamentals before complexity can re-emerge. This cycle suggests that progress is not linear, but oscillatory. Humanity swings between dispersion and concentration, simplicity and complexity, depending on planetary conditions. Each swing leaves behind traces that shape what comes next. Importantly, not all resets are equal. Some devastate globally, others are regional but cascading. A drought in one area triggers migration, migration triggers conflict, conflict triggers collapse. The initiating event may be local, but the consequences propagate outward. This interconnectedness means that future resets may not require a single massive trigger. A convergence of moderate stresses could be sufficient. Climate instability, resource depletion, and systemic fragility can interact in non-linear ways, producing sudden breakdowns. Modern civilization amplifies this risk. Global connectivity means local failures spread rapidly. Financial systems transmit panic. Supply chains transmit shortages. Information networks transmit instability. Resets need not begin with fire or ice. They can begin with interruption. Yet interruption also creates opportunity. When dominant systems fail, alternatives emerge. Decentralized solutions become viable. Social experiments flourish at the margins. What was once impractical under centralized control becomes necessary under fragmentation. History shows that many innovations arise during periods of instability. New political forms, new technologies, new philosophies often emerge in the aftermath of collapse, not during peak stability. Crisis accelerates change by removing entrenched resistance. The Renaissance followed the Black Death. Feudal structures weakened, labor gained value, new ideas circulated, catastrophe forced transformation. On longer timescales, resets may drive evolutionary innovation in culture as well as biology. Traits that survive collapse become more prominent. Cooperation, adaptability, and foresight gain value. Rigid systems are selected against. This perspective reframes catastrophe not as an aberration, but as a shaping force. The planet does not merely test civilization, it trains it through repeated failure. However, this training is brutal and indifferent. There is no guarantee of improvement. Many cycles likely ended without meaningful recovery. Many branches of human potential may have been lost entirely. Survival is not optimization, it is persistence. The question for modern humanity is whether awareness can alter the outcome. Can recognizing the cycle reduce its severity? Can intentional design create systems that bend without snapping? Some evidence suggests this is possible. Societies that diversify resources, decentralize authority, and cultivate cultural memory are more resilient. They recover faster. They preserve continuity more effectively. Yet awareness alone is insufficient. Preparation requires sacrifice. It demands restraint during abundance and planning during comfort. These are behaviors civilizations historically struggle to maintain. The deeper challenge is psychological. Humans evolved to respond to immediate threats, not slow-moving systemic risks. The signals of an approaching reset are often subtle, ambiguous, and easy to ignore until thresholds are crossed. By the time collapse feels undeniable, options have narrowed. This pattern repeats because it is rooted in human cognition as much as planetary dynamics. Still, the fact that humanity has survived so many resets suggests a core resilience. Despite amnesia, despite loss, despite repeated erasure, the species persists. Each time it rebuilds some version of civilization, shaped by the scars of the last collapse. The future will likely follow this pattern. Whether through climate shifts, geological upheaval, or systemic failure, the current configuration of civilization will not last indefinitely. Something else will follow. The critical unknown is continuity. Will the next iteration begin from ashes and myth alone, or will it inherit conscious memory of what came before? Will collapse erase understanding entirely or merely disrupt it? Catastrophe always transforms. The only question is whether transformation is blind or informed. The planet does not reset with malice, it resets with physics. Humanity's role is not to resist the cycle, but to decide how much wisdom can pass through it. Every reset redraws the boundary between what is lost and what is carried forward. That boundary is not fixed, it is shaped by choice. And in that narrow space between destruction and renewal, the future of civilization is quietly decided. As the cycle of destruction and renewal repeats, a subtle shift becomes visible in the long arc of human behavior. Each collapse does not simply erase what came before, it filters it. Certain traits, ideas, and social structures are repeatedly stripped away, while others recur with striking consistency. Over time, this selective pressure shapes not just ecosystems, but the character of civilization itself. One of the most persistent survivors across resets is cooperation at small scales. When large systems fail, survival depends on trust within limited groups. Families, clans, and tight-knit communities outperform rigid hierarchies under extreme stress. This is why, after every collapse, human organization contracts inward before expanding outward again. Large institutions fracture first. Bureaucracies require stability, surplus, and predictability. When resources become scarce, authority decentralizes naturally. Decision-making returns to those closest to immediate conditions. This pattern appears repeatedly from the fall of ancient empires to modern states under crisis. Over time, societies that rebuild successfully tend to reintroduce complexity gradually. They begin with local governance, shared labor, and reciprocal obligation. Only later do they layer on administration, specialization, and abstraction. When complexity grows faster than resilience, collapse accelerates. This suggests that the scale of organization matters as much as its sophistication. Systems optimized for efficiency often lack buffers. Systems designed for redundancy appear wasteful during prosperity but endure disruption more effectively. The planet rewards the latter during resets. Another recurring survivor is symbolic thinking. Even when technical knowledge vanishes, symbolism remains. Humans continue to create meaning even in ruin. Art, ritual, and story persist under the harshest conditions, serving as anchors of identity and cohesion. Cave art created during glacial periods, for example, demonstrates that symbolic expression flourished even when survival was precarious. These images were not decorative luxuries. They reinforced shared understanding, reinforced social bonds, and encoded relationships with animals and landscapes critical to survival. Symbolic systems also help societies process catastrophe. They provide narratives that explain loss, assign meaning to suffering, and offer frameworks for renewal. In the absence of scientific explanation, symbolism prevents psychological collapse. This resilience of meaning-making suggests that culture is not a byproduct of stability, but a survival mechanism. Civilizations do not rebuild solely with tools and crops, they rebuild with stories. Over successive cycles, certain stories recur. Creation after destruction, renewal after flood, fire as both annihilation and rebirth. These motifs are not arbitrary. They reflect lived experience repeated across deep time. Language itself evolves under this pressure. Words simplify. Grammar compresses. Communication prioritizes immediacy and clarity. Over time, as stability returns, language expands again, accumulating abstraction and nuance. Collapse trims excess. Recovery elaborates. Technological inheritance follows a similar rhythm. Tools that require rare materials or specialized manufacturing vanish quickly. Tools that can be made from local resources persist. Firemaking, cutting, weaving, and basic construction survive resets because they are teachable without infrastructure. Metallurgy, advanced engineering, and complex chemistry tend to disappear, not because they are unimportant, but because they depend on supply chains and accumulated expertise. Each reset forces humanity back to a core technological toolkit. This repeated regression does not imply failure. It is a form of compression. Civilization reduces itself to essentials, then expands again when conditions allow. The process resembles biological dormancy, a contraction that preserves viability through adversity. The danger arises when expansion outpaces memory. When societies rebuild without understanding why previous systems failed, they repeat the same vulnerabilities. Floodplains are resettled, forests are overexploited, energy is centralized, complexity grows brittle. This is why certain architectural choices reappear despite known risks. Cities repeatedly form near rivers because the benefits are immediate and visible, while the dangers unfold slowly. Without collective memory of past floods, the lesson must be relearned through disaster. Archaeology reveals this repetition clearly. Many ancient cities show layers of destruction and rebuilding, often in the same vulnerable locations. Each generation believed conditions had changed enough to justify return. Often they had not. Modern civilization exhibits the same pattern at a larger scale. Coastal megacities expand despite rising seas. Infrastructure concentrates despite known fragility. Systems optimize for growth rather than resilience. The belief that technology can outpace risk replaces the memory that risk always adapts. What distinguishes the current era is speed. Changes that once unfolded over centuries now occur in decades. Population density magnifies impact. Information spreads instantly, but so does disruption. Feedback loops tighten. In this compressed environment, the margin for error narrows. The buffering effect of time that allowed earlier societies to adapt gradually is reduced. Resets may arrive faster than cultural adjustment, yet speed also offers possibility. Knowledge can spread rapidly, awareness can scale, adaptive strategies can be shared globally. For the first time, humanity can perceive the cycle as a whole rather than experiencing it piecemeal. Whether this perception translates into action remains uncertain. Understanding fragility does not automatically produce restraint. In fact, awareness can sometimes breed fatalism or denial rather than preparation. Still, the persistence of certain patterns offers guidance. Decentralization, redundancy, local knowledge, cultural memory. These are not romantic ideals, they are statistically favored outcomes across repeated collapses. Civilizations that incorporate these traits recover more quickly and retain more continuity. Those that suppress them in favor of total control or extreme efficiency tend to shatter more completely. The long view reveals that civilization is less like a fortress and more like a tide. It advances, retreats, reshapes the shore, and advances again. Trying to freeze it in place guarantees eventual destruction. The future will not be determined by whether collapse occurs. It will be determined by how deeply humanity understands the pattern it is embedded within. Each reset is a test, not of intelligence, but of wisdom, not of power, but of restraint, not of ambition, but of memory. The planet will continue to change. That is not negotiable. What remains open is whether the next renewal will begin from ignorance or from hard-earned understanding. History suggests the cycle will continue. What has never been tested is whether consciousness of the cycle can alter its outcome. In the space between what is forgotten and what is remembered, civilization either repeats itself or evolves. That choice, narrow and fleeting, is the only leverage humanity has ever had. When all previous cycles are placed side by side, a final pattern emerges, one that reframes humanity's story not as a march toward dominance, but as an experiment repeatedly interrupted by reality. Each civilization believes it has escaped the limitations of the past. Each discovers too late that it has merely traded old vulnerabilities for new ones. Power concentrates as societies grow, resources pool, knowledge specializes. This concentration produces efficiency and innovation, but it also creates single points of failure. When disruption strikes, the collapse is not gradual, it cascades. Systems fail faster than individuals can adapt because individuals no longer know how to function outside those systems. In earlier eras, collapse dismantled empires and cities. Today, it threatens abstraction itself. Modern civilization exists largely in symbolic space, digital finance, virtual communication, algorithmic coordination. These constructs depend on uninterrupted energy and trust. Without them, value evaporates instantly. This is not speculation. Small-scale failures already reveal the pattern. When power grids fail, money becomes irrelevant. When supply chains halt, abundance turns to scarcity overnight. When communication breaks, coordination dissolves. Multiply these failures globally, and the structure of modern life collapses inward. What remains is humanity stripped to essentials: bodies, relationships, territory, memory. At that point, survival ceases to be technological. It becomes biological and social. Who can cooperate? Who can adapt? Who can remember? Memory becomes the most valuable resource, not data, but understanding, not files, but patterns. The kind of memory that explains why certain choices were dangerous, why certain systems failed, why restraint once mattered. Yet memory is also the first casualty of trauma. After catastrophe, people focus on immediate needs. As the past becomes painful, forgetting feels protective. Over generations, forgetting becomes complete. This is the core tragedy of the cycle. Humanity survives, but wisdom does not always survive with it. The ruins of previous civilizations do not teach by themselves. They are mute without interpretation. A fallen city can be mistaken for mystery rather than warning. A broken system can be romanticized rather than understood. Modern society risks the same fate. If collapse comes, future generations may inherit fragments of our world without context. Satellites may become myths, skyscrapers may be attributed to gods, technology may be remembered as magic rather than engineering, unless meaning survives. This raises a final, uncomfortable question. If collapse is inevitable, what should be preserved? Not everything can pass through the bottleneck. Complexity must compress. Choices must be made, consciously or unconsciously. Preserving power is futile. Preserving infrastructure is unlikely. Preserving knowledge requires radical simplification. Core principles must be distilled into forms that survive disruption, stories, symbols, practices, and values that guide rebuilding without relying on technology. The most important knowledge may not be how to build machines, but how to avoid building systems that collapse catastrophically. Not how to extract endlessly, but how to recognize limits. Not how to dominate environments, but how to read them. These lessons are rarely written in manuals. They are embedded in culture, in norms that discourage excess, in taboos that protect resources, in ethics that prioritize long-term survival over short-term gain. Previous civilizations likely possessed such knowledge. They likely lost it when prosperity made it feel unnecessary. The present moment offers a narrow opportunity. Awareness of planetary cycles, systemic fragility, and historical resets exists simultaneously for the first time. The knowledge is present. The question is whether it will be acted upon or archived and forgotten. Civilization does not fail because people are ignorant. It fails because knowledge becomes disconnected from behavior. Understanding does not translate into restraint. Warnings do not translate into preparation. The cycle continues not because it must, but because it is easier to repeat than to change. Yet repetition is not destiny. Patterns can be recognized, feedback can be integrated, Systems can be designed to fail gracefully rather than catastrophically. Complexity can be balanced with redundancy. Growth can be tempered with foresight. These are not technical challenges alone, they are moral ones. The future iteration of civilization, whether continuous or rebuilt, will be shaped by what is chosen now, not by promises of permanence, but by acceptance of impermanence. If humanity insists on seeing itself as separate from planetary forces, it will be corrected again. If it accepts itself as embedded within those forces, it may learn to adapt without total erasure. The planet does not oppose civilization, it tests alignment. When systems drift too far from environmental reality, correction follows. Every reset carries the same message, delivered without words: adapt or be simplified. The question facing humanity is not whether it can prevent collapse entirely, but whether it can preserve enough wisdom to ensure that collapse is not absolute. At the edge of every cycle lies this same choice: forget and repeat, or remember and transform. What has always been lost is not intelligence, but humility. What has always been rebuilt is not perfection, but possibility. The final measure of civilization will not be how high it rose, but how much it carried forward when it fell. When the cycle is traced to its furthest edge, beyond collapse and rebuilding, beyond memory and forgetting, what remains is not a warning, but a reckoning. Humanity is not standing outside history, observing its motion. It is embedded within a repeating process that does not pause for reflection. The planet does not care whether the lesson is learned. It continues regardless. Every reset reduces complexity, but it does not erase the capacity for it. That capacity lives in the human mind, in language, cooperation, and imagination. These traits have carried humanity through extinctions, bottlenecks, and planetary upheaval. They are the constants that persist when everything else is stripped away. What changes from cycle to cycle is context. Each iteration inherits a different world shaped by previous losses. The forests regrow differently. The animals return in altered forms. The climate stabilizes around new parameters. Humanity adapts not to a static Earth, but to a moving target. This means there is no final civilization. There is no stable endpoint where progress locks in permanently. There are only temporary alignments between human organization and planetary conditions. When those alignments drift, collapse follows. Seen this way, collapse is not failure, it is feedback. The tragedy lies not in collapse itself, but in the repeated loss of awareness. Each cycle begins believing it is unique. Each constructs narratives of permanence. Each treats stability as entitlement rather than exception. And when stability ends, the shock feels unprecedented, yet nothing about it is unprecedented. The ice has advanced before. The seas have risen before, the skies have darkened before, species have vanished before, civilizations have fragmented before. The pattern is ancient, predictable in structure, unpredictable in timing. Modern humanity has one unprecedented advantage: visibility. For the first time, the full arc of deep time is partially visible. Ice cores, sediment layers, genetics, archaeology, and astronomy converge on the same conclusion. Earth resets. Humanity rebuilds. Memory fractures. This knowledge alone does not grant immunity, but it creates responsibility. Responsibility is not about preventing change. It is about preparing for continuity through change. It is about deciding what deserves to survive beyond any single configuration of society. If the past cycles were shaped unconsciously, The next one may be shaped deliberately, not in outcome but in inheritance. What survives does not have to be accidental. The most durable inheritance will not be monuments or machines. Those crumble. It will be principles embedded in behavior, limits respected even when abundance allows excess, systems designed to decentralize under stress rather than collapse, knowledge shared widely rather than hoarded. This requires redefining success, not as expansion without end, but as endurance with awareness. Not as domination of nature, but as synchronization with it. Civilizations that survive longest are not those that grow fastest, but those that listen earliest. Early to warning signs, early to imbalance, early to constraint. The greatest illusion of the modern era is that intelligence alone guarantees survival. Intelligence amplifies capability, but without wisdom, it accelerates collapse. The same tools that solve problems can create vulnerabilities faster than they can be addressed. This is why previous civilizations fell despite ingenuity, and why this one is not exempt. The future will not judge humanity by what it built, but by what it carried forward, by whether it preserved understanding alongside invention, by whether it accepted impermanence without surrendering meaning. After the next reset, whatever form it takes, humans will once again stand among ruins, visible or buried. They will tell stories, they will search the sky, they will rebuild shelter and community. They will ask where they came from. What answers they find will depend on what survives now. If memory collapses completely, history will restart blind. If fragments endure, history may resume with clarity. The difference is not technological, it is cultural. The cycle has never been broken because it has never been confronted consciously. It has been endured, forgotten, and repeated. Breaking it does not mean stopping collapse. It means preventing total amnesia. The planet will reset again, that is certain. What remains uncertain is whether humanity will face the next reset as a species that remembers its place in the cycle, or as one that must learn the same lesson yet again. There is no final chapter to this story, only pauses between chapters written by forces larger than any civilization. What humanity chooses to preserve during this pause will determine how the next story begins. Not as a miracle, not as an origin, but as a continuation, finally aware that it has been here before.